So I know that most of you have probably heard of The Handmaid's Tale, or at least watched it. But as you do know, maybe you don't know, it was actually a book that was written in 1984 by Margaret Atwood. And she dedicated her book to the very person that we're going to be talking about today in this video. If you're new here, my name is Brandy. What I do is I bring dark history stories back to life by telling you guys about it and giving you the facts of the history. And while I do that, I put makeup on. So if that sounds awesome to you, please hit that subscribe button. And let's go ahead and start talking about The Handmaid's Tale and how it entails in how she's dedicated to this lady. She dedicated the book to a lady named Mary Webster, okay? And she was a witch that was hung, but she did not die. And that's the story that I'm going to be telling you guys today. So let's go on ahead and get this part started. So like I say, today we're talking about Mary Webster, and she was the one that Margaret Atwood dedicated the Handmaid's Tale book to, okay? So she drew inspiration from Mary, and we're going to talk about Mary. They called her half-hanged Mary. They called her all different kinds of names, but we're just going to call her Mary. Now, she began her life in London, in England actually, but her parents felt that she was getting older in years. She was like 40 and she wasn't married. And they didn't like that. So what do? They sent her to America to meet some unknown dude so that she can get married. And that's how she ends up in Massachusetts, in America, during the Puritan time. So Mary lived in Hadley, Massachusetts, and like I say, this was heavily during the Puritan times. We've talked about the Puritans on this channel a lot and how they use their religion to govern the rest of the people, which is really not the way things should be, obviously. And so, but she moves to Massachusetts and she marries a man. We don't hear much about William, her husband. Okay, we don't hear much, but we know that she went to America to get married. Her parents married her off because they were like, you're getting old, this is ridiculous, you should be married, you know, whatever. The guy that she marries actually comes from the founders. Him and his brother were like family members of the founders of Hadley, the town that they're living in, right? Unfortunately, something had happened and they kind of lost their fortune. And so Mary ended up being a beggar, basically. She was basically asking people in town, can I have food? Can I have this? Can I have that? And not only would she ask, she would say it in a terrible tone. She had a terrible, sour attitude. But think about it. Your parents made you leave your home country to an America that's being ruled by a religious iron fist, and you're having to marry a guy you've never met. I mean, I would be pissed too. So since her husband was one of the sons of John Webster, the former governor of Connecticut, you'd think they would have things and connections and all that, but no. Mary and her husband lived in a big meadow in a very shabby house, and what they did what they could to get by. You know, like I say, she was a beggar, and she was also kind of a bully when it came to begging and things like that. But they were socially dependent on the town for handouts. You know, during the Puritan times is very difficult for these people because first off, they're like the first ones in America. They don't know anything about how to grow things here. The soil is different in different states, in different countries. It's just different. So the Puritans really struggled in the beginning to grasp why they weren't successful in having these towns and having all these things. And it took them a while to work it out, obviously, that it was, you know, they were trying to use the government as a religious tool other than the other way around. And so anyway, our girl Mary, like I say, she's got a temper. And this is not the first time that she's been pointed at for witchcraft from when I told you guys about earlier. Now, there was a lot of people that say they could not even walk by her house without their cattle and their horses and stuff like that would not pass her house, because evidently she had set up some kind of weird thing that if you pass by her house, then she's gonna curse you and all this other stuff. So you can see the attitude in the town towards her already. that she's sour attitude, you know, you can't walk by her house, she's gonna curse you, you know, she's almost like, you know, the little lady that you hear that has all the cats, it's really creepy, and you stay away from her house, you know, because she's a witch and blah blah blah. Another weird thing during this time that I found out that was something kind of new to me was disturbing witches. Yeah, disturbing witches was a practice that the Puritans would do. They would go into a witch's house unannounced, slap her, hit her, whatever, or ask them, can we pass your house? Or they would beat her up. Because if you're disturbing the witch, they can't disturb you. That was their logic behind that. So let me tell you, the first time that she goes down for a witch, in a witch trial, is because they thought that Mary made herself into a chicken and threw herself down this chimney, okay? And the chimney, of course, was lit, obviously, and it scalded the chicken. Well, everybody looked at Mary the next day, and right where the chicken was scalded, Mary had a burn. And so they were like, she turned into a familiar, into a chicken, and she went down that chimney to do something bad. But these men of faith saw this burn on her that was in the exact same place as the chicken that went down the chimney. Okay? Yeah. They really thought this was her way of hurting people, was turning into familiars and spying. They thought this was her way of spying on her neighbors, basically. You know what I mean? Now, like I said earlier, people didn't really pass her house with their cattle or their horses because she was supposedly cursed them, and they couldn't pass her house. They couldn't go past it, okay? And so they were saying that she wasn't allowing them to pass her house. She was casting spells. And so in order to pass her house with their livestock, they did this thing I was just mentioning, disturbing witches, okay? Where they would just go in if they thought you were a witch, and they would just throttle you, shake you, push you, hit you, all these things, because like I say, if you're disturbing her, she can't curse the livestock, meaning the livestock can walk past the house while they're beating her up. Yes, it sounds terrible, because it is terrible. They practiced this in 17th century New England, okay? This was a normal occurrence, that if you were thought of as a witch, people would disturb you, and they could do it by asking you if they could pass, or they could beat you up. Just saying. Okay, so then they said she entered a house that had an infant, and she had such an influence that the cradle was raised from the floor 3 times with nobody touching it. Supposedly, she used her mind to lift up this cradle 3 times with this baby in it. And yeah, and so they blamed her for that. So she has her first witch trial, okay? She ends up going to trial for all these things, right? And the first time that she goes, she doesn't get convicted. You know, they're like, there's not solid proof that she can turn into a chicken or that she can levitate something with her mind. You know, that's just, they didn't have the proof. And so she was allowed to go home. Now, they said that she had familiarity with the devil who came in the shape of a cat. And they terrified the imps, and they would suck on her body, you know, sucking her blood like we always hear. So both magistrates, like I say, they did not find any evidence that was convincing and acquitted her, and she was free to go home to Hadley. But she had unknowingly made an enemy while she was in her witch trial. So, a man named Philip Smith was actually one of the ones that had recommended her to go to her first trial. Okay? And so you can imagine that this man was very upset when they did not find her guilty of witchcraft. Okay? He was a deacon. He was a judge. He was on the committee, you know, that sent her up there to go and get witch trialed and all that stuff. And it really just hurt his feelings that she did not get the guilty charge. So guess what he was going to do? He was going to make sure that she was found guilty, point blank period. So he comes to Hadley, to where she lives, right? He starts doing some digging, you know, and a year and a half after Mary's acquittal, Lieutenant Smith started dying, okay? A lot of weird, strange things were happening around his death, and they were blaming it, of course, on Mary. Yeah, because it's, you know, it's always the witch's fault. It's always the lady that's old, childless, her husband's not around, she's begging, she's checking all the boxes, you see? So when Philip arrives in the town, and he's this very renowned deacon, judge, all these things, okay, he actually has an altercation with Mary. Mary asked him for some food or some money or something, like she always does, and he did give her something, but it wasn't enough for her, so she gave him attitude. And he said that from that day forward, she bewitched him and she cursed him, because that's when he started feeling ill and all of this crazy stuff started happening. So Smith's illness started supposedly after Mary, you know, curses him or whatnot. And now the lieutenant is in constant pain, okay? He's always writhing in pain. His downstairs area is like burned and cut up, okay? Yeah. He's got bruises on him. He's got marks on him. He's got holes in him. He has all these things, but I'm going to give you guys what I think this man was doing, but was doing it on the down low. I think that he was torturing himself and trying to blame her, because that was a thing back in the day with religion, was to torture yourself to get the sin out. And I know that Puritans believe that, point blank period. So I think that might have been what he was doing, but they thought it was Mary, and so we're gonna go with that. Some people said that they saw a supposed familiar that was under the sheets of his bed, and whenever they would try to find it, it would disappear. This, for some reason, it angered a lot of people in the town, okay? And it angered a lot of Philip's friends. And so they did the thing that they thought would be the best thing to do. And what's that? To disturb the witch, right? Because Mary, according to them, was the one that was doing all these things to Philip Smith. Even though she's not, and he was a hypochondriac. And I think that he did a lot of that stuff to himself, because his feelings were hurt that her first trial did not go as planned like he wanted. He wanted her to be found guilty. And so I think that he was doing these things to himself, but that's just my personal opinion on this. That's not a speculation, just saying, you know. His friends are very, very upset. And so they're going to go and disturb the witch. Yes, they are. And they're not going to do it and just by beating her up and all these other types of things. No. They're going to go into her house and they're going to do a lot of really terrible things. So because of this big group mentality, all these people start heading over to Mary's house. Keep in mind, I don't know where her husband is and all this, okay? But they drag her out of the house. They say they're going to disturb the witch, but they drag her out of her own house, okay? And they drag her out to a tree, and they do beat her for a little bit, and then they string her up. They get her down, they string her up from a tree, okay? And they leave her hanging there in that tree for quite a while before they decide to go back and check on her, okay? And what did they find when they checked on her? She was still alive. She was still alive, hanging from the tree in this cold all night long, because it was snowing during this time. This whole time, she was just hanging there, and she was not dead. She wasn't. And so what did they do? They took her down, and they put her into a bank, like a snowy bank, covered her up with snow, and left her there to die. The weird thing is, on this night that they went and disturbed the witch of Mary Webster, Lieutenant Smith slept sound as a bird. He had gotten what he wanted. Point blank period. I full on believe that this man was hurting himself. He was a hypochondriac and was blaming her for it. And when he knew that his friends were going to go out there and disturb the witch, his problem was going to be over. Thus, he slept soundly like a baby. Okay. But that's, they end up finding Mary, okay, in the snow, freezing, and she's still alive. Okay. She's been hung from a tree. She's been beat. She has been put into a ditch and covered in snow after being exposed to the elements all night long, and she's still alive. Did the group of guys get in trouble? Nope. No, not even a little bit. They ran away from the scene, so nobody got caught. Nobody knows who did it. And she ended up living 11 years after her hanging, while the lieutenant ended up dying just like maybe a month later. Now, they say that when he died, okay, that first off, his corpse was like swelling in this certain area, and like one of his breasts or whatnot, it was swelling up, and nobody really knew what caused that. He had his back was bruised and had holes in it, which, I mean, we already kind of knew that anyway. You know what I mean? Wow, that is super pigmented. I should have started with one dot. B. Wow, that's bright. All right. Anyway, so we're gonna keep going. So he died on a Saturday, like I was saying. He dies on a Saturday, and everybody is, old girl, she's still alive. She's hanging in there. She lives for 11 more years. But the lieutenant passes, and like I say, his body started to swell in one side of his chest. He had a bruised back with holes. He died on a Saturday, but was still warm on Sunday. Like, he died like that Saturday morning, and on Sunday when they felt of his body, he was still warm. That's super, super weird. I'm sorry, that's super weird. Then by Monday, his face was like a discolored type of look. Like he was, and he had blood running down his cheek. Okay. Now, there's a possibility here, in my opinion, that this man took some poison to kind of nail our girl. Because I'm sure he found out that she survived her hanging. And she survived her beating, and she survived them leaving her in the elements. And so he's got one more thing up his sleeve that he can do. And I seriously think he took some cyanide or something like that, because those are the kinds of things that happens to the body afterwards. There are drugs that will keep your body warm. I'm not sure what they are. I cannot remember the poison episode all the way, but I'll link it. Don't worry. People heard like really weird sounds coming from his room too, like moaning sounds and stuff like that, almost as if somehow they were haunted, that like he was haunting them or something like that. But like I say, they ended up laying his corpse to rest, and then we didn't hear anything else about Philip. And so he's dead and he's gone. He's out of the picture, which is perfectly fine. And our girl lives for 11 more years. Now, I was so curious, and I couldn't find it anywhere. How was her life after that? Like, did she actually break something like in her neck and she just like survived? Or did she not have her neck broken at all? Like, these are the questions I didn't have. I had questions and I didn't have answers, is what I'm trying to say. And so I'm really not sure if, I'm not sure. I feel like this guy was really bound and determined to nail Mary and make sure that she was seen as a witch. According to the community, this was really tearing him up inside. He really wanted to make sure that this chick went down for it. So I don't know about the whole bloating of the body. I mean, I know the body bloats anyway, but not like within the first 24 hours. And then it's staying warm after that. It's almost as if he might have taken laudanum, because that does keep the body warm after they've passed. I have heard that. I'm just saying, there's possibilities out there on why this man died the way he died. And I think that after Mary was unsuccessfully hung, he was pissed that it didn't work. I think he accidentally took himself out of life. Just straight up. So like I say, after her hanging, Lieutenant or Philip Smith, whatever you want to call him, ends up passing away, and she lives on until 1696. I am the worst when it comes to dates. Goodness. And so that's when she passed away 11 years later. I don't know what her quality of life was, and I was really wanting to know, like, what was her quality of life after going through all that. Knowing that they didn't have the medical knowledge and things that we have now, it's like, how did she survive being in the elements that way, being hung from a tree and then thrown into a snowy bank and covered with snow and surviving that? I can see why Margaret Atwood dedicated this book to Mary, point blank period. Because if you've watched the show or if you've read the book, I unfortunately have not read it. I plan on reading it, but the show shows all the check marks of the handmaids. The handmaids are not married, they're old, or the only reason why they need them is to make children, which is another thing. Like, they sent Mary over to America to get married so that she would have children, and she never did have any children, I don't think. But imagine surviving your lynching as a witch and what people thought about her after that. They still thought she was a witch because she came back to life. After they hung her, after they beat her, after they put her in the snow, she still lived. And so the stigma of being a witch, even though to me she's an incredibly strong person, they saw that as her being a witch because she survived all that. All that was magical that she did, some kind of magic made her stay alive through her torture, through her hanging, and through the elements. And so she had that stigma around her entire life. Now, if you've watched The Handmaid's Tale, you can probably see where a lot of this comes from. You know what I mean? With the fact of the females being controlled, being looked at in a certain type of way by having kids out of marriage or not getting married and living together. All those were sins in a Puritan's eyes, and the fact that she didn't have any children, maybe she couldn't have children, that lessened her quality of life according to other people. And so I see why Margaret dedicated this book to her, because she embodies pretty much everything that these girls go through. Whether it's maybe not the show in its entirety, but in the way they portray women in America in the show, is how they looked at witches, like since the beginning of time, since everybody thought that shamans and healers were terrible people and called them witches and made that like a derogatory term. And so they make you think in this show that these women are worthless. They're not married. They're old. The only thing they're good for is giving children. The only thing they're good for is waiting on somebody hand and foot. Okay. And so this witch is very, very, she had a lot of influence on Margaret. And I believe that Margaret thinks that Mary could possibly be one of her ancestors as well. I could not find any solid proof of that, but I do know that she dedicated the book to her, and I can totally see why, because of what she went through and how she survived it. She kept coming back stronger and stronger and stronger. They could not keep her down, which is kind of the, you know, the girl in the show, June. That's her embodiment. Is she does not stop. She does not quit. They can do anything to harm her and hurt her, and she's going to come back stronger. And that's exactly what Mary was like. I'm glad that she got to live out at least 11 years. Unfortunately, we don't know what her quality of life was after going through all that. And especially not having doctors and things like they do have now. I imagine she was in stages of hypothermia. She probably had, she may have had broken pieces in her neck, but it just didn't kill her. We don't know, unfortunately. But we do know that she's the inspiration for an amazing book, The Handmaid's Tale, and as you know, the TV show. And I can totally connect the dots on why she would dedicate this book to a supposed witch. Because basically that's what they think that these handmaids are. They just call them handmaids and not witches. So anyway, that's our story for today. I'm sorry it took me so long to get one to you guys, but with my kids being out of school, yeah, I don't have much time to do this, unfortunately. But don't worry, I'll be digging up new stories, and we'll be having at least one every single week. So thank you guys for being here today. And if you don't mind, hit the subscribe button so you can see when my next video pops up. And I love you guys, and have a wonderful weekend.